In our last episode, we talked about the real heroes depicted in the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare. Today, in the Military Movie Club, we'll be taking a deep dive into the actual events and discussing if the movie got it right. John W. Peace is my co host and the author of A Boy from Cracker's Neck. Stories of his grandfather, who was a B 17 bomber pilot during World War II. John is a history and a storytelling expert and a great friend that I enjoy having on this show.
Well, thank you, Melanie. Glad to be here. I'm not sure if I'm an expert, but definitely a big fan of history. And I
A fan.
love reading about it. And I love movies about it too. And that's why, of course, I love this show and stuff. And as
Yeah,
you
we're
know,
having a great time. Just
yeah,
it's a great excuse to watch some terrific movies and talk about it.
and
And
also go
hopefully,
back and revisit some old movies.
for
Have a
sure.
good reason. Yeah, very enjoyable.
For sure. Well, I think anyone who would read your book will definitely call you a storytelling expert. So it's okay for you to be humble, but you are a terrific storyteller. And so, what we're going to do today is a little bit of a question and answer format. So, I'm just going to pull up a question and you are going to give the answer, and I'll kind of fill in as we go. So, and anyone who's watching, we would love it if you have any commentary. And if you have your own answers to these questions, you might know a little more in this deep dive than we do. So definitely make a comment as we go. So the first question is, what is the history behind the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare? Which I know sounds like a really broad question, but we're really just kind of setting up what this movie is based on generally.
Yes, and this isn't really a spoiler, but just a little bit of history. And you have to go back to 1940. We just finished up Masters of the Air, which is 1942, but this movie actually goes back to 1940. And you
Mm.
got to realize in 1940, Britain is losing the war to Germany. America's not entered the war yet. America's trying to get supplies to England and their support of England, and the Nazi U-boats were intercepting, and we weren't able to get supplies. And the first of this movie, you see Winston Churchill. We're dying. We can't get supplies. We can't fight. And then he has a lot of Parliament, even talking about surrender.
Oh,
Talk
that's
about
right.
yes,
Mhm.
and and
Yeah, they depict
so
that in the movie.
so
Yeah,
he makes this big statement. It's in the trailers of the commercial for the film.
yeah,
Hitler's not fighting fair. We're gonna have to fight dirty too. And so that comes the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare
yeah.
and Black Ops, and this the whole mission of this movie and of the SOE, which is Special Operations Executive, which is
Mhm.
that Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, was to do this mission, disrupt the supply line to the Nazi German U-boats. So
Yes,
yes,
yes, and that's what they did in the movie,
yes,
and it's based in truth. So let's go through and talk about the scenes in the movie or different elements of this story that they depicted and see if they got it right or not. So the next question is, and I know this is the burning question everybody has, what are they really called the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare?
well, Melanie, I talked about this a little bit before we started filming. When I
Yeah.
first saw that title, I thought, oh, that has to be a Hollywood title. And as we know, when you look into the history, it's exactly what Winston Churchill called it. So yes, they got it right.
Yeah, I agree. When I saw that title, we're the next episode that we're going to be doing is actually a comparison between this film and Inglorious Bastards, which everyone is making that comparison. I think that the comparison begins with the title,
Yes.
Ungentlemanly Warfare. That just sounds so
Glorious bastards.
silly.
I mean, yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
just sounds way too silly to be true. But yes, that's what they were called. I'm in doing the research. They actually had a number of nicknames. In addition to that, they were also called the Racket,
Yes.
which doesn't sound very. They're just the Racket, the Firm, and the Baker Boys.
Yeah.
So they were actually very unpopular among the other branches of the military at the time. Now, today we look at the special ops, deep cover. We have loads of movies about them, and
Yes.
we'll talk about a very famous one towards the end of this show. But they were actually considered the fourth branch because they were like something really out there on the edge, and they were not liked.
Yes.
Interestingly enough. So I think that's partly why the name is a little bit silly. Well, it's just the ungentlemanly warfare because they were doing the things that the other branches would never do because they had not embraced the dirty tactics yet that, of course, the Nazis were using at the time. So very interesting name. But yes, that wasn't just for the movie. So, all right. So here's the next question. I think that you're going to be an expert on this one.
Did Anders Lassen really use a bow and arrow? When first saw the movie, I was a little skeptical, going, "Oh, they threw in a little Rambo on me and stuff, and all that." But when you do the history, yes, he did. Now, this particular mission, we don't really know the history, but he did take it on other missions, so it would be, kind of commonplace he would actually take it on this mission too. And he earned the nickname, the Danish Robin Hood,
Mhm. Yes.
in training and around the bases in England and stuff.
And
So
I'm
that
sure
was,
that had
yeah,
everything to do with his use of bow and arrows.
yes. So yes, he did. We'll give this one a yes too.
Yeah, I like that, it said that he brought a very primitive form of killing to a very mechanized war. And
Yes.
as we saw, if you watched our first episode, we actually showed the clip where we first are introduced to him using the bow and arrow. It's kind of surprising and it's fun. And in that moment, you realize, wow, something as primitive as a bow and arrow really actually can be useful. So,
But it worked. It was stealthy. It was quiet, and
yeah,
it killed people. So yeah.
yeah, we sure did work.
And like
Yeah.
his character said, it killed Nazis or Nazis.
So another question. This is where we first see the bow and arrow used is the rescue at the Nazi base. And the question is, did the bloody rescue at that Nazi base to get Appleyard free to be a part of their group, did that really happen?
Well, Melanie, as we know on the history, yes, it did. Now, this is where Guy Ritchie, the director, and the screenwriters took a little bit of liberty, because the real history is very comical.
Yes.
They actually freed him. They actually went, got him out of this Nazi, I wouldn't call it a prison, but it's definitely a camp. But they did it without killing anybody, and it was kind of a funny story. And I'll let you go ahead and tell that funny story of how they did free him.
Oh, you're gonna let me have it?
Yeah,
Aw.
I think that's a good one for you to.
It is it is a funny story. So it was a military base and they were rescuing him. And it's said that the way that they did it in the film was an amalgamate of different experiences. So it's not like what you saw didn't happen ever, but it didn't happen then.
Yeah.
And what really happened was no one was killed, first of all. Um, a Nazi fainted. A bunch of them were in the shower, and the commandant was getting a haircut.
Yeah, somebody was in a hairnet.
A
I
hairnet,
remember reading,
that's it,
yeah,
I'm sorry. It
hairnet.
was a
Yeah,
hair the commandant was wearing a hairnet. Sorry, I got
yeah.
that wrong.
So
Yeah,
so they
can you
freed him
just
without firing a shot. Yeah.
that's just a funny scene to imagine. I think of it a little bit like, George Washington and his group surprising the English when they
Crossing the
had
Delaware, yeah.
no
Catching them
idea
all
they'd sneak
taking
over in
baths, yeah.
winter. So they were very good at what they did to the point they didn't even have to kill anyone to rescue one of their important crew members.
But as your question says, it did happen. They did rescue him from a Nazi base. So yes, that's a
So
true
the
statement.
answer is yes.
Yes.
Did they get it right? They made it a little more violent than it had
Dramatic.
to be. Yes, a little more dramatic, but that's all right. We'll take it. All right. Did Anders Lassen rip out an enemy soldier's heart and hold it in his hand? Because that's something that happened in that scene as well, as they were rescuing Appleyard.
And this one is well, flat out, it's no. It did not happen. And made good screenplay. It went on with his character. It showed how Anders, that was a very personal thing. Very personal
Mhm.
to kill Nazis and stuff. And that was true. And that was true that, he joined up and that's what he wanted to do was kill Nazis because of his family history, his brother getting killed. So, but actually ripping somebody's heart out and stuff, no.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, interesting enough, though, I found out it was the actor Alan Ritchson's idea to
Yeah.
put that in the film. Did you know that?
Ah, yes, I now it comes to mind. Yes, so,
Yeah.
add some drama and
So it's kind
probably
of
that craziness, the whole thing they were kind of promoting that these were a bunch of madmen, a little bit on the crazy side, and I'm sure that's why they added that.
yeah, and that was very Inglorious Bastard-esque, where they're taking scalps in Inglorious Bastards, and here he's taking a heart. But I think it's neat too that the actor got to make that suggestion and have it happen. And he actually read 4 books all about Anders Lassen. He took it very seriously, which is interesting because it's
Yeah,
there's so much comedy, and he is really the comedy relief as that character. Just the way he carried himself, he was almost, I'm not sure what's the politically correct term, effeminate,
yeah,
you know,
and
a lot.
so, he's this hulking man,
Yeah,
and he just has these little one-liners that are kinda middle school childish,
yeah, it just really, oh, I
personality,
loved it.
yes.
I loved it. Yeah, it was great. All right, next question. Here we go. Was the suitcase train heist based on real events?
Well, actually, it was Melanie. Now, we can't say it was necessarily an Operation Postmaster, but the SOE did have a whole division that came up with these like James Bond type of equipment, and the suitcase, I don't know what you call it, contraption, did exist.
Mhm.
So very very possible. We don't know for a fact.
Yeah, we don't know that it was necessarily in that operation, but like you said, it did exist. It
Yes,
was
and
made
it was
in what.
created for that. Yes,
Yeah,
for that same
the way
purpose.
that exactly, the way it was used,
Yeah.
the very way it was used to kinda
So
snatch.
yes, it was based on real events. We just don't know if those real events actually take place during Operation
Yeah.
Postmaster. But yes, real
Probably
events.
not, since
Yeah.
that whole scene and those characters were fictional, or at least not actually there in the case of Marjorie. Um, but Churchill had something that they had nicknamed Churchill's toy shop. So you
Yes.
kind of pictured the elves making toys, but Churchill's toy shop is where they made all kinds of these strange inventions that helped with the operations. So
We
pretty
just needed
pretty
a few.
interesting.
We'll talk about that about another movie franchise, but
Yeah.
you
Oh,
with
yeah,
all
that's
the
coming up.
toys. Yes. Okay.
So here's another one. Did they actually throw costume parties to distract the Germans, as shown in the film?
Well, they did throw the parties. Now the costume party, don't know, but they definitely used misdirection, and they had the Germans be distracted by female prostitutes, and they set them where they wouldn't face the harbor. So yes, that is a true statement. They did throw a party to distract the Germans so they could steal the Nazi supply ship. So yes, that's actually yes.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't know about the costume part. That maybe a little more research. If anybody watching this wants to come back and put in the comments if that was something that they dressed up, maybe that was something that was really popular at the time. But it's kind of funny that they showed it in the movie. Now this part wasn't correct. They had them in a building where they're actually to chain them in
Yeah,
at the door. The reality is the only venue they could get for this actual operation was a cafe overlooking the harbor. So they were actually, but they had lit it up so much with lanterns and the harbor being darkened that it was overlit so they couldn't actually see what was going on in the harbor. So they literally did it under their noses. I
yes,
think that almost would have been another great way to do it, is to actually keep the reality of the fact that they were looking out across the bay, or not seeing very much, obviously, because of the lighting, but,
yes.
yeah, it's funny. Alright, next question. How many Nazis did the ministry actually kill?
Well, if you go to Operation Postmaster, it was probably very, very little. And but when they did the screenwriting for Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, they actually combined several missions
Mhm.
of the SOE together to form the drama and stuff. So, and you might have the more details on exactly how many, but there was other missions where they killed a lot of people.
Yeah,
That's a fact. This
yeah.
particular operation, probably not like you see on the screen and stuff, but they were very effective. They were very dangerous, group.
Mhm.
What
They were
And
very well
that's
trained
what
and
Black Ops do. Yes.
exactly. I mean, you think about, and of course, that's going to be one of our next questions, if not the next question. But what is the legacy coming
Yes.
up when we talk about Black Ops? But we are talking about these are the forerunners to what today we might look at as our Navy SEALs
Yes.
or our Delta or our Rangers, and they were very skilled and very trained. Now, the movie you would think it's just a half a dozen people that are involved in it, but in reality, it was a lot of operatives were involved in this mission. There was actually more like 55 people involved. However, the heroes that you meet in the film were the main ones that actually carried out the operation. So, but we don't really know for sure, other than just to say, like you said, a lot.
Yes.
They
A
killed
lot.
a lot of Nazis. So they were like Inglorious Bastards in that way, killing their Nazis. All right, next question. What is the legacy of Special Operations Executive?
Well, like you kind of mentioned before, we have it today, and it's actually commonplace. You know, we have agencies, whether it be CIA or with the military, with the SEALs and stuff.
Mhm.
But this was the forerunner. And you know, we were coming out of an era of World War One, and I was doing a little bit of research. You go back to the Hague Conventions and the Geneva Conventions. These things were not in the rules of warfare. For example, when Gus put on the uniform, put on the Gestapo jacket and wearing the hat, well, under rules of warfare, that's illegal. You're not supposed to wear, and you're not supposed to use camouflage and stuff like this. So, when Winston Churchill called it ungentlemanly warfare, he was exactly right. We are going to break the rules,
Yeah.
and he knew what the rules were because Winston Churchill was a former military person himself. But he knew if he was going to win, he couldn't follow the rules, and his enemy wasn't following the rules. So the history and the legacy, and then of course then there's a whole legacy in our movie franchises that we're going to talk about later that you really see come out, and its influence our entertainment and everything.
Yeah. And one of the things that they got right in the film was that the operation truly was illegal.
Yes,
They're talking about, well, if you get caught by the Germans, you'll be
killed,
tortured and killed.
tortured and killed. Yes,
And
yeah,
if you get caught by the English, you're going to go to prison
yeah,
because the area that they were conducting the operation in was a neutral,
yeah.
and it was illegal to do what they were doing. So that definitely these this information had stayed classified until the 1990s. So a lot of
Amazes me. I mean,
so we
just think
have
about
this
that.
legacy, but the truth is, the legacy of all of our special operations probably around the world, starting with them, because this was really where it all got kicked off. I guess you could say the Germans may have started if we're putting a microscope on the Germans and the type of warfare they were conducting that caused Churchill to say, "Gosh, we got to fight back. If they're going to show up with knives, we better have some knives too, right?"
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting that so much of the history is really relatively only recently declassified, um, and it sparked the modern Black Ops. But that really kind of leads us into this next and final question, which is, was Ian Fleming inspired by Gus March Phillips to write James Bond?
Well, when you watch the movie and then you read the history, there's no doubt. And Ian Fleming was there. He was
Mhm.
in the ministry, so he had privy to all this information and stuff that was classified. So he could write his books in fiction,
Right there. Yep.
and everybody could assume that he created all this. And well, he did create James Bond. I'm not going to take nothing from him and stuff, but he was really regurgitating and transforming real life events into his James Bond franchise. So absolutely yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just so funny to think about because for all this time, wow, what a creative person. And
Yes.
when this all finally is declassified, oh, yeah, Guy March Phillips, is very easy to see how he was drawn from him. Now, my understanding from research is that March Phillips was actually a poet and a writer himself, and he only lived, as we talked about in the last episode, he only lived 3 months after this operation before he was killed in another mission. Had he gone on, he may have beat Ian Fleming to the punch and
Yes.
written, because I understand he was starting to write some stories and things that were based on the experiences
Memoirs,
that he
yes,
had.
as it was happening. And
Yeah,
you
and
wonder if
who knows?
he could have even talked to Ian Fleming about it. You don't know.
Ooh,
Could have easily at a
interesting.
bar or pub. So yeah.
Very,
Like I
yeah, that
say,
is,
just not taking nothing from Fleming and the Bond franchise at all. But it does give you
yeah.
more backstory of where this stuff was coming from. And you watch James Bond, it wasn't quite as far fetched and than in real life. You know, when I made the reference to Q and all the toys and all that, Kirk Hill was developing all that for his spies for his SOE. So there was a real life Q and Q department. So
It sure would have been interesting, though, to see what type of a job March Phillips would have done on a similar character had he been able to live and write his books. I guess
yes,
we'll never know, but definitely he lived on in the form of James Bond, and I guess that I know that we plan to do. It's not next week, but in I believe the week after that, we plan to watch a documentary about Ian Fleming
yeah,
and kind of talk a little bit more about James Bond and about who just might be the next James Bond. And of course, everybody's wondering if our Guy March Phillip actor Henry Cavill will become James Bond, and we'll
he's
talk
my
about that.
choice. But I wouldn't have picked Daniel Craig, but Daniel Craig's wonderful. So I was
He did
wrong
a
again.
he did a
Yeah,
fantastic
yeah.
job. I know I want to dive into this. I really want to dive into this subject, but we're
We'll
gonna
save
just
that for
kind of
next time.
we're
We'll
gonna
save
put
that.
a little carrot out there, hopefully, or a little, a little bait to get you to come back in a couple weeks, and we want to know what you think of it too. But so next week we will be doing a comparison between the Inglorious Bastard film and Ungentlemanly Warfare. There's definitely a lot of easy comparisons to make, and I think that'll be a fun subject
Look
for the
forward to
next
it, man.
show.
Yeah, look forward
Yeah,
to it. That'll be fun. It'll be
I'm
fun. I
looking
hope the
forward to it.
viewers tune in and comment on it. It'll be a fun time. So,
So if you haven't watched it in a while, watch Inglorious Bastards this coming week, or before you watch our episode if you need a little refresher, and be sure to subscribe and follow so that you'll know when we have our next episodes up. We sure love having this community and want to be able to build it up so that we have more people giving us your opinions and your thoughts on these films. And also just give us suggestions. Put in the comments if there's a film that you think it would be fun to talk about. And, just like you do in a book club, that's what we're trying, that's what we're
oh,
striving to do with
video
our
book
movie.
club. Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So I think it's a neat idea. I don't know if there's anything like it out there. There's a lot of channels on YouTube, but I don't know if there's a club.
yeah.
So please join our club and give this episode a like if you enjoyed it. And we will see you next time.